Hey, David Brewster here with New Brewster's Millions of Rants, and this is Beg, Borrow, Steal. And this episode is loosely based around a really famous quote from Pablo Picasso. And the quote is, "Good artists borrow, great artists steal." And technically Picasso, wasn't the first person to say something along that line. But definitely most people credit Picasso from, saying that quote. And you really shouldn't take that quote too literally. We're not actually stealing anything. We're really borrowing ideas and kind of reshaping or reworking and making variations of other, ideas or music. And this is really common. All artists do that, whether it's a certain shade of blue that an artist used or a certain chord progression or a lick that a musician used. It doesn't really matter. Art is art. And all artists borrow from other artists. Think of, Van Halen borrowing ideas from Alan Holdsworth, maybe Yngwie borrowing ideas from Paganini and Bach, Stevie Ray Vaughan borrowing ideas from Albert King and Freddie King, and so on. There's tons of examples of this. Robin Trower borrowing from Hendrix, and etc. So if you're curious about this, you want to learn how to rework music, this episode's totally for you. Okay, to get started here, we basically need to select some music, and this could literally be anything. It could be Coldplay, it could be Hendrix, Slayer, Neil Diamond, it doesn't matter. It could be literally anything, but you have to choose something. And I've already selected something here. This is actually something I learned back when I was in high school. I was studying classical guitar, my junior and senior year of high school, and I learned this piece. This is from Ferdinando Carulli. And Fernando, he actually passed away in 1841. He's a famous classical guitarist and composer. A lot of his music is still part of the classical guitar repertoire, which is taught all over the world in universities and conservatories. Definitely a legendary guitarist, and if you're not familiar with this piece, it's okay. But here's an image with a little bit of history, behind him and some of his music. So the section of music I've selected, it's actually just an 8-bar section of this piece. It's from Waltz in G, and this section, it actually shifts to the relative minor, and it's really just moving between two chords. But when I first learned this piece, the first part of the piece is fine. It's kind of happy and G, and it's light, but then it noticeably changes, and it gets really dark during this little 8-bar section, and then it goes back to G major again. But my ears perked up when I remember sitting there playing this and almost falling asleep, and then I hit this little section of the song, and it was like, whoa, what is that? And I remember sitting there playing it and thinking, man, that would be a cool riff, or electric guitar, distortion, or whatever. And that's what we're going to basically select. But here's an image showing like the chart or whatever, the sheet music, and notice the highlighted area at the bottom. That's all we're going to focus on. It's just that 8-bar fragment. Okay, so that little 8-bar fragment of music sounds like this. One more time. So it's really just moving between E minor and B7, which is basically signaling or serving up, harmonic minor tonality. That's like a minor 1 to a major 5 chord. We've talked about that lots on my channel here. But that's basically what's happening. It's starting with a kind of an implied B7 over F sharp, like that. And then just the open strings, open G, high E to the open B, and that's an implied E minor, right? And then right here, that's like a B, B over D sharp right there. Like think of B7, but it's really just that part. And then just take that, move it up a half step, and now it's part of E minor 7. So right there, and then start it again, that, B7 over F sharp, E minor, that B over D sharp, and then just end with E minor right there in open position, like that. So it's very basic, right? So right there, you could finger pick that. You could hybrid pick it, pick and fingers. Or you could just pick it. However you want to play that. But that's kind of the preferred, or the way it's normally taught, like that, in open position, using lots of open strings. So that's basically the part, or the music, that we're going to analyze and variate and mutate, right? Like that. And keep in mind, we're really just moving back and forth between B, or B7, and E minor, right? Basically what's happening there. So that's the first step. So now we're going to start making variations. So we're not going to deviate from what was originally written or played there. We're going to keep the same thing, but we're going to find different ways to play it. And this is definitely kind of some stepping stones you can take to reworking something and making, something you've learned and turning it into something completely different. And we're going to, like I said, lock onto the same thing though. So we're still going to do this. But now, the first variation, we're going to play without using open strings. So now we need to rework those chords and figure out how to play that without open strings. So now we can do... Right? And there I used open strings. We could actually rework that final chord, and you could play like that. I'm technically using the low E open right there, but I definitely, found another way to play that ending chord. Instead of there, you could do it right there. But as you can see, we did the same thing, but for that first little change, instead of playing the open G, high E, and open B, we basically just found that chord, right there. So we had this, moved to this, and then instead of playing that open B string like we had right here for that B over D sharp, we can actually fret that B note right there instead of the open B string. So we're reworking that part, and then that E minor 7 can be played like that. So the same thing, but refingered and reworked like that. Let's make another variation now. So we're not going to change a single note. We're going to keep everything the same, but we're going to physically play it a different way. So now we're going to do like that. A little stretchier in there. So we started with the first two chords are the same, right? But instead of doing this or this, we're going to basically rework that like that. And that's a much, stretchier option right there. But I kind of like that. It sounds cool. Like that. So we had that to this, to this, to that. And then start it again. Right there. And then I ended on E minor like that. So I'm going back and using open strings there at the end. But that's another way to play that. It's the exact same thing, but arranged and fretted, totally different. For the next variation, let's completely give this a makeover. Let's rework what we're doing. So let's not start right there, right, for that B7 over F sharp. Let's start somewhere totally different. We're going to keep everything the same. Every single note is the same, but we're going to physically play this in a totally different way. So let's start right here. And there's that B7 over F sharp. Instead of that one, it's this one. And the E minor over G, the B over D sharp, and then E minor, and then it starts again. And you can just end on E5 or E minor up there, however you want to end that. But we're still playing the same part or the same thing, but noticeably in a very different way. Okay, the next variation is one of the easiest variations you can make. Whatever you're playing, a lick or a melody, or it could be a chord or something, we're going to basically move it down an octave, and then we're going to flip that and move it up an octave. So we're going to try a lower, pitch and a higher pitch for this, just to see what it sounds like and what happens. So we're going to do the exact same thing, but an octave lower, and that's going to look and sound like this. octave lower down there. Now I did have to kind of configure some things just to make it work in that position or in that octave. But right there, you can see we're still doing, you know, that basically that B over F sharp right there, B7 over F sharp. There's your E minor over G, right there. And then right there, you know, I had to do it like that, then back. And then I ended on that E minor right there. And that's a cool variation of what we started with. But like that. And technically I did play the stretchy variation. I think here's what we started with. But you get the idea, right? Alright, let's do the exact same thing for this variation. Now we're going to go up an octave, and this is going to sound like some weird, like Sweet Child of Mine variation, like this. Right? Exact same thing, just an octave higher than we originally had it. So now we've got that, and that, and this, and that. And that almost mimics what we did down here, an octave lower. Right, so we're still kind of borrowing that same movement we had here, but an octave higher, you know, way up there. And for that final chord, I just played harmonics right there, which totally fits. You could pick it, hybrid pick it, finger pick it, or whatever. The important thing, though, is you're reworking and reshaping and moving what we started with in a totally different direction. And the next thing you know, that's going to magically turn into something else. And it's going to be original because you put it there. Okay, one more variation here. This is going to be completely different now. So we're going to keep the exact same thing, same notes, right? Same chord progression that's being implied here with that melodic movement. But now we're going to do something completely different with it. We're going to tap it, right? Like that. Same thing, but played with tapping. Like that. And then right there. And that's obviously a little harder to play, or a lot harder. If you're not a tapper, that might be really hard. But I love doing this, like finding something that grabs my attention. It could be classical, obviously. It could be blues, rock, jazz, funk, country. It doesn't, Dixieland, jazz. It could be anything. Reggae or something, ska, funk, whatever. But the important thing is you've heard something. You're like, ooh, I like that. You know, it could be 5 milliseconds of music. It could be 5 minutes. It could be an entire side of an album or something. But the important thing is you've selected something. And you like whatever it is. Like maybe it's the key or the pitch or the groove, or it could be the melody or the melodic content. It could be a sequence. It could be sweeping or something, tapping or whatever it is. But it's grabbed your attention, right? And then you need to learn it, obviously. You need to sit there and practice it, make sure you're learning it correctly. And then, you know, allow yourself some time and just sit there and play with it. You know, make variations, and you're going to make mistakes. You're going to probably venture into some things that are going to sound bad, but you're experimenting. You know, it's almost like you're mixing your paint together, and you're trying to make some really elusive shade of, you know, whatever color, red, blue, green, whatever. But you're stirring things up, right? So if you want to think of the paint analogy, you're stirring things up, and then you're going to put something different on your canvas. And in this case, you're putting something different on your guitar and reworking music that you've learned. And hopefully that's steering you toward original thought, original ideas. And like I said earlier, the next thing you know, you're going to start playing with this, and it's going to turn into something else. Maybe it's going to turn into a riff or a song, part of a melody or a solo or something, a lick. You never know. But the first step is just kind of tapping into yourself and trying it. Just make variations and just be as creative and as playful and use your imagination. Like, yeah, what's another way I could play this? And figure it out. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Brewster's Millions of Rants with Beg, Borrow, Steal. And I know a lot of people out there are confused by the whole stealing term. They're so paranoid and afraid of being sued or some kind of copyright infringement or something. And that's obviously not what I'm talking about. You know, there's a big difference between borrowing some ideas and kind of reworking them and flat out stealing. You know, I'm not telling you to go form a band called Red Zeppelin and you write a song called Hairway to Steven or something. It's like, no, that's obviously you're, treading on some very strange turf right there. You don't want to flat out steal, something. You don't want to call yourself Jenny Page or something. It's like, no, don't do that. But you could take Stairway to Heaven and learn, some of those parts and stuff and rework it, maybe put it in a different key, slap a capo on. There's tons of stuff you could do. You could start tapping it or whatever. Listen to Stanley Jordan play Stairway to Heaven. He'll blow your mind. So, take something and put a little bit of yourself into it, I guess is really what I'm talking about here. Learn what originally was there and then figure out like, well, hey, what happens when I put some of me in there? And you never know. You could write the next Stairway to Heaven, just kind of playing around with some of these concepts and ideas. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.